on our left, government team first tournament. The other, on our right, opposition team, Go Hyun-myeon. Well done. But I'm sure that their parents are at this time very proud of them. So why don't I call upon their name individually so that you can recognize them, please. Government team, Hong Hyun-jin, will you stand up so that we can recognize him, please? Right? And Kim Ji-hoon, right? Lee Jang-kyu. Right? Give them a big hand, please. Then opposition team, Lee Jong-hoon. Congratulations. Before the educators this time, we have 9 educators to make a final decision in this championship. I'd like to start with Mr. Scott Wittgenstein.
Ladies and gentlemen, the fossil fuel-based energy companies right now are basically blocking the use and the proliferation of clean energy technology. Now today in our society, we see that the depletion of fossil fuel is apparently approaching. And we all agree upon, and we hope that the opposition side also agrees on the fact that there needs to be some measures in order to prepare and to counter the situation, a crisis that is evidently approaching. Now today, ladies and gentlemen, we do believe that we need to take a way of gradual change in order to prepare for this energy crisis. And as previous methods were very ineffective because, as we see, the industry remains big, today we do believe that a gradual measure of taking the responsibility from the fossil fuel-based energy and actually using the money for the development of the renewable energies and the clean energy is the most effective way to counter this crisis, ladies and gentlemen. Now with the money that we gather, we can support both the technical developments and the systems that will be fit for use. Now, because the development of the clean energy technology is antithetical to the profit structure of the fuel companies right now, we do believe that we should take this measure, today's motion, to prepare for the future by gradually changing the energy dependency. Now, before moving on to any other arguments, I'll have to first make a simple point of justification here. Because we know that someday throughout this debate, the opposition side will point out that this is an unfair disadvantage, and these companies are basically not privileged and they are going through double jeopardy. However, ladies and gentlemen, I want to make clear right now is that globally, $1.8 trillion are actually invested to the fossil fuel industry. Not to mention that 60% of the government's budget that goes as an investment is basically to the fossil fuel industries, not renewable energy. So especially when this is true, we do believe that they are not deprived of the support of the government. Not to mention that right now, for the externalities, more than 50% of the climate change and the CO2 emissions are from fossil fuel-based energy industries. So we do believe that here, there is a justification that we can ask them to be responsible for. So with that statement, let's move on to the definition first, in order for a better debate. Today, I want to define fossil fuel-based energy companies as companies that provide energy primarily from fossil fuel, evidently. So we're talking about companies like S-Oil or Shell, where their primary way of producing energy are from fossil fuels, like petroleum or coal. We want to define as subsidies and paying the higher taxes to subsidize, as in the government collecting the money from these companies and redistributing the money towards the cleaner energy industry in a way that the government sees that there can be much more development, ladies and gentlemen. So the decisions will be made within the industry for the best usage of money. So with that statement, let's move on to the arguments. Now today we basically have 3 arguments in today's case for the government. Our first case is about the governmental responsibility of preparation. In this argument, I'll talk about how there is an energy crisis that is coming, and how the government has an evident responsibility to prepare the society for an upcoming crisis or a currently existing social problem. Now, in our second argument about the government's responsibility to protect the environment, I'll talk about how the government holds the responsibility to create the best environment and to maintain and stabilize that environment, because that's the place where the people live in and the government is there for the people's rights. And in our third argument, we'll talk about company benefits, about how this policy, how this motion actually benefits the companies too, and that argument will be elaborated by our perfect Deputy Prime Minister. So with that stable, let's move on to the arguments. Our first argument is about the governmental responsibility. I want to talk about this in 2 different levels. First of all, what responsibility is there for the government? And second of all, how that responsibility is fulfilled. Let's look at the first level. What responsibility does the government hold? Ladies and gentlemen, we do believe that the government has a responsibility here to maintain a stable economy as well as the right and responsibility to prepare the society for an evident crisis that is a social problem that can be upcoming or already exists. Now, what am I referring to right now is that the government should always prepare the society, because in the cases of crisis, it is evident that the people living within the industry and the companies and within the nation will be obviously harmed, not only with their rights to live, but to right to remain with a stable way of life. We think that the government, in order to protect this right, should always prepare the society to possible changes. Now, that is the reason why what the government is trying to do right now is that they are trying to counter the increasing amount of selling of cigarettes and alcohol. Because what they're seeing right now is that health problems are rising, and they know that there will be deaths continuously rising and rising. That is the reason why the government is taking measures in order to block damaging feature, ladies and gentlemen, by syntax or other measures. So now let's relate this back to this motion by moving on to our second level about how this responsibility is fulfilled. Ladies and gentlemen, the government here today in the motion is not prematurely killing an industry, but is simply doing the best it can to prepare for something that will inevitably happen. Now, considering the fact that the depletion of fossil fuel is evident and it is coming, we do believe that there is an evident harm that is going to be inflicted in our society in the near future, or maybe not a near future, but then it's going to happen one day. Now, what we're saying here is that when there is an evident harm, should the government be involved in taking responsibility for preparing for this, ladies and gentlemen? We do believe that the government is absolutely doing so here. No, sir, because the collapse of fossil fuels by going through a decreasing the size of the industry gradually, not by a moment, but by gradually, we do believe that the government can decrease the amount of fossil fuels used and use that industry to boost an alternative here, which can actually support us in the near future. We do believe that the government is taking the best measures it can to provide the best environment for the people in the future. Because under this model, what we're going to have is that we're going to have a decreased amount of consumption in fossil fuel, which is obviously going to counter the actual energy crisis. But not only that, we will have a potential alternative, an alternative that can actually be used in our society to counter the decrease of the fossil fuel, ladies and gentlemen. Therefore, today we say that under our model, the government is perfectly fulfilling its duty. Yes, sir.
But what you're actually suggesting here is that the means that we achieve it should be by having an artificial oil shock, by having an inflation enough to shock everyone and shift people's consumer behavior. Do you think that will be effective?
So that is not necessarily true here, because as the opposition side is trying to characterize as if the government is going to create an artificial oil crisis, ladies and gentlemen, that is not true right now. We do believe that the energy itself is inelastic, ladies and gentlemen, which basically means that we are not going to cause any type of dearth in the energy industry. And if it does, if some kind of price rises here, we do believe that that is something that is what we're absolutely aiming for. It's not an oil shock, but it's an increase in price that we need. Because with the increase in price, the people can actually feel the changes, and that is the only way we can solve the energy crisis, by decreasing the amount of consumption, ladies and gentlemen. Well, you can simply say that energy costs should be low, but then it should not be, because the rise of the price is the only way we can make people responsible and change consumer behavior. We see that the previous methods that did not touch the price have always failed. Campaigns, advertisements have never been effective, ladies and gentlemen. That's why now is the time for us to touch the price. Let's talk about the second argument here, ladies and gentlemen, about how the environmental responsibilities are fulfilled. Now let's talk about this in two different levels. First of all, what responsibilities are there? As the environment is basically the ground on where the people live and do their social activities, and as the government respects the people's right to take social activities, and the government is supporting that, we think that the government should also take part and take responsibility in preserving the environment for that ground. Because, ladies and gentlemen, without the environment, we cannot stay in a society. That's why the government holds this responsibility. Now let's talk about how this is fulfilled. Now, first of all, by the direct decrease in fossil fuel industry size, what we're basically doing is that we are decreasing the speed in which the environment is damaged. Because we all know how detrimental the fossil fuels are. I've been saying that more than 50% of the damage is actually from fossil fuels. We're out of order, sir. And therefore, we say that by decreasing the use of fossil fuel, we are basically benefiting the environment. But not only that, at the same time, as we're having a gradual turn towards a renewable energy industry, we say that we are actually having a potential measure that is not going to touch the environment, ladies and gentlemen. We are looking for sustainable green development here under our policy, and no one will be harmed as long as people will be keeping responsible under the price changes. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, today the government side was fighting for our energy crisis and to counter that energy crisis, ladies and gentlemen. And therefore, under that model, we want you to propose. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we on the opposition side understand that there is a problem with the environment, but the solution is not what the government side proposed, ladies and gentlemen. There's one fundamental reason. The free market does work, and it will work, ladies and gentlemen. We stand on that side for the opposition. Now, the stand on the opposition side is clear. When it comes to the economy, the government's model harms both the fuel industry and the environmental industry. Secondly, we understand in terms of environmental purposes, it also harms the environmental progress as it hinders progress. I'd like to explain that with my constructive and later my arguments. Before that, I would like to move on to my rebuttals. I have three major rebuttals. Firstly, about the government. Firstly, the first argument saying that the government should be is imperative because it's a necessary situation. Well, firstly, ladies and gentlemen, just because it's a high risk doesn't mean that every single instance the government can intervene. Ladies and gentlemen, what the government's duty here is not to intervene in every single instance, but instead to do the right decision. And in this instance, when it's imperative and that the oil industry will run out in 30 years, the government needs to be cautious, ladies and gentlemen. And they have not thought whether the policy is the best, because we understand the current status quo is going in the right direction, that we believe the free market is working, as I'll explain in my second arguments. Secondly, there was this rise of price, ladies and gentlemen. The government's fundamental basis of their entire argument is saying that if there's a rise of price in oil, the rise of price of consumers, people will naturally choose an alternative, ladies and gentlemen. But they've not based on facts, ladies and gentlemen. A recent study by the International Energy Committee stated that it needs $50 rise in a single barrel to have effective measures for consumers as well as producers, ladies and gentlemen. What this means is either two things. Either the government has a lower price that does not affect consumers and does not persuade consumers nor producers, or second, they have a ridiculously high price that might be effective, but in turn creates an oil shock that is twice as serious as the oil shock in the 1980s, sir. As such, this point does not stand. Also, we would like to point out that the first point about the government side saying, well, fossil fuel subsidies are too high, are not relevant to that case. We're talking about taxing fossil fuel companies and giving it to clean energy companies. As such, if you want to talk about overpriced subsidies, that will be in another debate. As such, we move on to my arguments, which is firstly economy in terms of free market, secondly environmental progress in terms of natural. Yes.
So if we're talking about clean energy being so expensive, don't you realize that with the status quo, we're going to face a much more serious situation, maybe twice expensive in the future?
They're neglecting the free market, ladies and gentlemen. The current progress is happening. I don't know why they're neglecting facts. And I'll show you what facts are with my first argument. The economic progress in terms of free market, a market that has worked since the dawn of time, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, we have to understand the natural progression of investment happening. Now, necessity drives investment, ladies and gentlemen. Government pressure does not. We understand that the current situation of clean market is the ideal situation in which natural investment can happen. There's two reasons. Firstly, is the dying industry, as they've so massively explained it, the natural resources of their government revenue is dying, ladies and gentlemen. It's imperative for them to find a new market. And secondly, perhaps more importantly, it's a blue ocean, ladies and gentlemen. This R&D and research has not been fulfilled. Under these two circumstances, we have to understand that these companies are legitimately proposed to go on these investments, and these investments are actually happening, ladies and gentlemen. These companies are fiercely looking for a new alternative, though. Thank you, sir. When you look at companies like SK Energy, GS Clean Energy, when you look like other companies, Exxon just last year declared that $60 billion would be promoted to R&D within clean energy. There's a reason why they're doing this, because the market is driven by necessity. The necessity currently is on the side of clean technology. It's on the side of the opposition side. As such, we understand on these instances the free market will work. Thank you, sir. Yes.
If necessity drives industry universally, how can you explain that in Japan and China, almost no renewable energy development has reached the public sector?
Well, the public sector, we understand, it's in the R&D stage, ladies and gentlemen. As I'll explain in the second half, we're simply not ready yet, ladies and gentlemen. R&D is projected, the R&D perfection is to be projected in which perfected in 15 years, ladies and gentlemen. And that happens through free market, ladies and gentlemen, not forcing it, as I was saying with my point here. Because forcing money into the market doesn't mean that the market suddenly revives and R&D works, because of two reasons. Firstly, thank you, sir. When you're taxing fossil fuel companies, they argue that they deserve this price, that they have an externality, ladies and gentlemen. But firstly, we understand when it comes to fossil fuel industries, taxation is already implemented, ladies and gentlemen. When you buy oil off oil market, ladies and gentlemen, almost 50% of the price is already taxed, ladies and gentlemen. As such, the government is already taking care of this so-called externality, ladies and gentlemen. But furthermore, the government side model was very unclear. Which company are they targeting in their model, ladies and gentlemen? The consumers, the producers, which companies are they specifically targeting? Unless you have that, you You don't know which are the actors, so the government side is very vague on this matter, ladies and gentlemen. But more importantly, the fundamental case of the government side is saying that subsidies do work. What we say it doesn't, ladies and gentlemen, because of one fundamental factor. The government is selectively choosing which market can be conducted, and history has proven us that this does not work. No, thank you, sir. This does not work because the government is not the legitimate actor, ladies and gentlemen. An example will be the Hydron company, a famous company in Sweden in which government subsidies was massively pumped into this company, ladies and gentlemen. Under the government side model, this company should have thrived, ladies and gentlemen, but it did not because the government is selectively choosing that company instead of respecting natural free market principles. As such, we understand that natural free market principles are on the side of the opposition. With that, I'll move on to my second argument, which is about environmental progress through natural time, ladies and gentlemen. So thank you, sir. Now, this is a very simplistic argument, ladies and gentlemen. There's a very simplistic case in the government side's argument, ladies and gentlemen. They're saying that the environment will become better if we just pump more money into these industries, ladies and gentlemen. And I've proven to you in an economic perspective why it does not work. This directly leads into my environmental purpose. Because just because you pump money into the environmental progress doesn't mean it just rises up, ladies and gentlemen. Because I've explained the economic perspective, there's also the perspective of, especially in energy industries, because of the crowding out, ladies and gentlemen. Crowding out means that there can be a limited amount of investment done, ladies and gentlemen. The problem with Hydron, ladies and gentlemen, was that private companies were very reluctant to invest in Hydron because massive amount of government industry investment was already there, ladies and gentlemen. Why would you invest in a company that has 80% government investment already, ladies and gentlemen? It's already at its full potential. As the government intervention here is going against the market principle and doing this crowding out effect that blocks free market principles that are working, and they're going to work, ladies and gentlemen. On the other hand, our model is understanding the market facts, ladies and gentlemen. No, thank you, sir. We understand two things. Firstly, this will happen because the pressure of citizens will be inevitable, ladies and gentlemen. As the future progresses, we understand pressure of citizens are already there. Citizens are pressuring the oil industry, other industries to change, ladies and gentlemen. As such, responsible companies must have to follow this because respect their consumers. Also, we understand, again, the market principle, ladies and gentlemen. If oil companies are taking revenue from oil and oil is depleting, we have to understand to survive in an economic perspective and to survive in an environmental perspective, they have to follow market principles. And they're doing so, as I proved examples of other companies investing in new markets, ladies and gentlemen. And finally, we come to the conclusion that the debate here is not about which side gives more money, it's about time, ladies and gentlemen. When it comes to the environmental subsidies, scientists have proved, economists have proved, it takes at least 15 years to have this fully invested, regardless of government subsidies or not, ladies and gentlemen. As such, we understand within 15 years, we understand that free market will work, and despite all of their attempts, it still takes 15 years to do so. As such, we understand both sides are in agreement. So it just differs which side does give the money, ladies and gentlemen. And we on the opposite understand under market principles, when the government does it, problems happen. When the free market does it, actual results occur. And for these reasons, we are proud to oppose. Thank you.
I'd like to open the podium to Deputy Prime Minister.
Yoon Sini once said, there's no use crying on the day that the doctor tells you that you have cancer. Because you already had cancer before the doctor told you. So rather, you should be happy on the day that people told you you have cancer. Because now you can do something about it. You learn something about what to do next. And you learn how to develop yourself, how to better yourself for your health. Now, you learn that it is a very good day. Now, that's exactly what our policy today is. Now, this policy is most certainly rude, but most certainly it is an awakening to society to propel the necessary transition to clean energy, to renewable energy that we need to develop in order to survive in the near future. Now, the energy depletion crisis, it's already there. There's no use denying it. And this is exactly why this motion is necessary right here, right now. This is exactly why Team Proposition is proud to propose. Because this policy is the most effective in solving the problem. Now, before I move on to the last part of our constructive case, I'd like to rebuild first upon our first two arguments and then rebut the points made by the opposition. Now, first of all, okay, they said we'll be creating an artificial oil shop. Well, first of all, the artificial part may be correct. Well, the oil shop, not so much. Well, but even if this artificial oil shop is created, isn't this better than the entire energy
Sure.
collapsing. No, thank you, sir. The entire energy industry collapses, and the entire basis of humanity right now, the entire society will crumble apart because everything in our society today runs on energy. And we believe that that is much better than just an artificial oil shock that raises the prices a little bit.
Sure.
Moving on. Well, this instance is not only any instance, as they said, because energy depletion shuts down the entire society, which demonstrates the absolute need to propose this motion. Moving on to our rebuilding. Now they failed to disprove the government's responsibility to prepare for the future because there is an imminent energy depletion, and the only way to prepare for this is to go through a transition process. Replacement is the only way, because without replacement, well, how are we going to fill the holes created by the depletion of the fossil fuels, which is already happening as it is? Because we believe that subsidies will go into developing renewable energy and decrease pollution of the environment. We believe that the first two arguments that we have made are standing perfectly. To elaborate more on our environmental harms argument, we already said that this decreases the use of fossil fuels because this is a form of a sin tax. Moreover, because this decreases the absolute amount of CO2 emitted into the atmosphere. This is pretty much self-explanatory in that it is decreasing the global warming process. And moving on, because we're moving forward with the developing of the renewable energy, we believe that we're providing two benefits, double benefits. Now moving on, I'd like to refute the arguments made by the opposition. Now, first of all, they had an outrageous argument about the free market. Well, first of all, the energy industry is most certainly not a free market because, first of all, the energy industry is oftentimes an oligopoly and most times monopolies. Just look at the case of South Korea. The energy industry, the company that produces electricity in Korea, there's only one, KEPCO, that produces all of the electricity for all the households in the entire nation. And this is exactly why their free market analogy ceases to work. Because, well, first of all, the market that we are talking about is not a free market. So I don't even understand why they brought up this analogy in the first place. So thank you. Moreover, their example of the GS Energy Group, I'm going to elaborate this a little more in my third argument. But this process of turning to renewable energy is exactly what we want to encourage. And this encouragement happens through the use of subsidies, because by direct investing, government will have a stake inside the decisions made by these companies. And therefore, because the government's interest is in sustainable energy development, we believe that our solution is perfect for this process. Moving on about their argument about environmental process. Well, we believe through investing in renewable energy, without this policy, we have already seen a 10% increase in the efficiency of production, as well as a 12% decrease in the pollution of the environment. These numbers show what we have achieved without subsidizing anymore the energy companies for renewable energy. But if we do subsidize the energy companies from this point, we will only see an exponential increase in the way that we increase the efficiency of production, as well as the efficiency of the renewable energy, as well as decrease the harms made to the environment. And moreover, we pump our money in. They also talk about how private companies will not invest inside these companies, will not invest into the energy companies. But the government has already played a large role. We pump our money, we pump all our taxes, and the government uses that money into the subways, and we save the environment. Just look at what KTX is doing, what the central stations are doing. We save 12 trees for every KTX site. That's a lot of trees because there are a lot of KTX rides in South Korea. Now moving on to the last part of our substantial case. We believe that through this policy, not only will the environment as well as the society and the world and the longevity of the world in general will benefit. We believe that this will create benefits for the industry for energy industry and the companies within that industry as well. Pursuing this policy generates wealth for the companies and therefore the country. Let's think about long-term benefits, not just short-term. This will create long-term solutions and this will indicate the path that energy companies will have to take and should take. Not opposing the notion was to get and foster a world where, when, and this is most definitely happening, fossil fuels run out. We will have no method and no mechanism in order to produce the product. They will not be able to sell because they don't even have the raw material. They don't have energy to run the factories. They don't have the energy to produce the things that we need in this country because there are no resources, no energy, and therefore no products. And then these companies and society will eventually disintegrate, which is exactly what team government and team opposition will probably never want to happen. Now this policy is not singularly targeting these companies because these will actually help these companies. For example, Shell and BP, and as they have told us, GS energy companies have already taken big steps in developing renewable energy and clean energy technology. Even without our enforcement, they're already feeling the need to develop it. Because feeling the need to do this because energies will run out soon. They feel the need. And if the subsidies go, and then what we're talking about, the subsidies that after the taxes and the main subsidies to the renewable technology, these subsidies will also go to the companies without because the government is giving money to those for developing renewable technology. And if these companies are already developing new technology, then, if you look in net worth that they're losing, they're not really losing, they're gaining because they already have a net increase in the amount of subsidies they get as a fossil fuel company. But if they get more subsidies as renewable technology goes, they don't really have much loss. They have more weight, they have more capital to develop their renewable energy, as well as an opportunity to increase the longevity of their own company. Now, when this policy is set, we will be able to use these subsidies for the development of the infrastructure of the renewable energy. Because right now in the status quo, we do not have the necessary infrastructure to implement renewable energy because we don't really have the right technology yet. But if we do use these subsidies to increase and to develop the infrastructure in which we can implement and use these renewable energy sources, then these companies who have used these subsidies to produce and develop the renewable technology will even gain a greater benefit because then people will be able to access. Because accessibility increases and the way that these energy will be used is set. These companies will have another market to use other than the fossil fuel markets. So there is nothing that these companies will actually lose because in the end what these companies are doing is that they're gaining another opportunity. They're gaining an opportunity to make a transition, and the key word here is gradual transition. They have a market to sell. I think this is exactly why we believe because all the benefits shift to the proposition's case, we believe that the proposition takes this debate, and we must never succumb to the opposition. Thank you.
I'm going to go on straight to my rebuttals. So first, starting with the rebuttal about the tactics and the nature of companies, the energy companies that we're talking about right now. So they give you an example of public utility companies, but in fact that's actually a good example for us because that one company that they're talking about, which isn't really an energy company but a public utility company, is government subsidized and at the same time very, very inefficient, and actually inefficient because it's government subsidized. But what we're talking about is not these public utility companies, but the companies that drill and supply energy, such as SK and GS. They basically agreed to that. So, and there are many. But then they basically agreed that the free market is working in terms of these companies, and that these companies are learning to reallocate their resources somehow, although their first speaker didn't say so. So now, then they say that the companies do both. The companies are learning how to reallocate their resources, but it doesn't matter because even if these companies are doing both sustainable energy and non-renewable energy, then it doesn't matter because the government ultimately takes money from one sector and gives it to the other, but it's still the same company, so it doesn't matter. Basically, that's what they told you. But then, why are you making this policy in the first place? Moreover, we say that's a problem because the government is deciding. And basically, the government is stepping in and saying, since you're going to do this policy anyways, here, we'll do this for you. And basically, that doesn't work because that messes with market principles, which we've been talking about, in which when the government invests and says, this is the industry that we want to promote, sometimes it's not the industry that's best for the market. No, thank you, sir. That's what causes inefficiencies such as Solyndra. No, thank you, sir. And then basically that market fails. So then they say, no, thank you, sir. They also mischaracterize these tactics of companies by saying that companies are going to say, well, since we know that we're going to eventually die out, let's make a hell of money while we can. And they're choosing these unsustainable tactics, so we have to stop them from doing it and make them invest in renewable energy, which is actually different from what the first speaker said. But then they say, no thank you, sir. So then they say, when these companies make a hell of money, then suddenly everything will fail. But then we think that even if high school debaters here know that this isn't going to happen, if we are aware of the consequences and we are aware of the threats, then those companies will know too. And in fact, there is sufficient proof in the status quo that they already know because they're the ones that are investing in SK and GS, or like they're the ones that are investing in green energy. They're the ones that are trying to promote things such as solar energy, even though they're the very companies that have, for the past few decades, promoted unsustainable energy, because they too know that it's not working. And so basically we can see from the point that the fact that they're investing, that these companies will do it by themselves. So then secondly, going on to the second rebuttal about who is the best actor to promote clean energy, because basically we came to the consensus that we need to promote clean energy. They say that the government is responsible, but if we look at most precedents, the government is not actually responsible for most scientific breakthroughs. What this means is that, in fact, in terms of renewable energy, all these attempts by the government to fund a certain section of the sustainable energy has actually failed. We've given you the example of Solyndra, but not only that, there's also been cases in Italy and other parts of Europe in which the sustainable energy industry had been subsidized for decades, and then the government decided that it was inefficient. Basically, and they gave us the example of the train too, and that's great too, because the train, although it was 100 years ago, was a private breakthrough created by demand. We think that there is sufficient demand in the status quo. So basically we asked them, what's their, no thank you, sir. So moving on to my third rebuttal, which is about, is this going to change anything? Because basically they're pretending, if we bear through this kind of minor shock right now, we'll get through and we won't have to face the big shock later on. That's actually factually untrue for the very reasons I've been talking to you about for the past 3 minutes. But basically we say that this isn't going to change anything first, because if they're so concerned about reducing oil, then oil taxes already exist. And here the issue is that we're taking more from fossil fuel energy and we're giving it to where the government sees fit. Basically, we see that the government is not the best actor to choose where the government should invest in. And then secondly, we say that if we use energy like we do now and we try to increase the prices so that less people will use it, which is basically their tactic, it's not going to work unless you increase the price by $50 per gallon. We see that that's not going to happen. Even if it does, it actually creates a worse harm on society. So then what are we going to do? No, thank you, sir. We have to shift to renewables, not by the government, but by private market investments. And then if we have a breakthrough in renewable technology, which we proved to you isn't going to happen through the arbitrary choices of the government, then the consumers will move where there is the cheapest and most efficient energy. So, and their alternative to that is that we can create a minor oil shock, say, I don't know, we can do this gradually is basically what they're saying. And so basically they conceded that we will suffer, whether it's minor or major, an oil shock. And it is major, because even a 30%, even a 30% increase in oil prices in the 1970s and 80s actually created this really big oil bust that affected the economy, the world economy, for over a decade. And that was when we were even less globalized. So we say that in the status quo, no, thank you, sir, we can do that if we have a breakthrough technology. And where will that breakthrough technology come from? It will come from the investment, as it is already in the status quo. It will come from the investment of these private entities. We say that the free market allows for a more gradual and strategic shift of capital. This is the important part. No, thank you, sir. Through the free market, we will strategically be able to shift our capital until we get that technology, or until we get that the level of market implementation that we would like. No, thank you, sir. So with that, I'd like to move on to my constructive argument about how this policy is actually counterproductive. We say that what the government is trying to do is actually damaging what is already existing, and the private corporations that are already investing in the status quo. We say that the government has a crowding out. This is based on the principle of a crowding out effect, in which the government is deterring private investment that is actually and already occurring. So the first reason for this is that in order for technology to develop, there has to be a certain level of competition, whereas these companies that have been funded for so long have reached this level of complacency in which the government keeps investing, but they're not making any progress because they're actually not the right places to be investing. So we gave you not just the example of Solyndra, but also like actual countries such as Italy and Spain, and even South Korea that is stopping renewable energy subsidies from this year on. And these countries have all failed to do this through subsidies. Secondly, we say that we are also taking money away from the very companies that are dying out anyways, and because they know that they're dying out, they're already reallocating their resources even without government investment. So basically they're saying, since it's within one company, since it's basically like the same companies such as SK and GS are doing it anyways, it doesn't matter if the government steps in and reallocates the resources from here to there, right? No, because we said that there's a very crucial factor in it, that the government is deciding among the various companies. For example, if there are a lot of energy companies, and we proved to you that there are, then the government doesn't necessarily know which is the right one to be investing in. So basically we see that, and it's actually better for those companies to be competing for the advantage, to be competing for the first breakthrough. And so it's not good to provide this kind of level of complacency. But then we say that private investment, on the other hand, has led to implementation. And the government investment that has occurred to this point will be replaced because in the status quo we already recognize that there is an energy crisis. Even consumers such as us know that there is an energy crisis, right? So private investors are moving towards investing in sustainable energy. But they're being deterred by the government and their choices are being altered by the government also. We think that the fundamental difference is that these companies that are doing private investment can venture. They can take adventures. However, if you're doing this with taxpayer money, governments can only be very conservative. They can't afford to make these ventures and do it on taxpayer money. So basically, we say that that's where the difference comes from. And then lastly, we say that even that the government is also losing the moral high ground because it's punishing these energy companies that are already dying anyways, even when it's not the fault of the energy corporations that are drilling oil that they're not developing sustainable energy. And even if you leave it, they will still reallocate their resources to the effective amount for the economy. So for these reasons, we are very proud to oppose.
Mic test. Opposition here tells me that we have 30 years down the road until we lose our oil industry and deplete it completely. Then, a second later, they told me that it's still in the research and development stage, renewable energy. And they say that it's just a gradual process that will happen in time. If you ask me and the proposition, we're in big trouble. Why has this motion been brought to light? The fundamental reason this motion has been brought to light is not because the oil industry is being depleted. It's an additional problem. It's being depleted and we don't know how to solve it. The proposition's policy here is a double policy. It's trying to take care of the expenses that we fear that these oil-based companies will pay. And we're trying to make the transition as smooth as possible so that the citizens in the future will not be suffering any big oil shocks, as they said in the 1980s and 90s. First of all, before I'd like to go on into the questions, I would like to note here quite passively that it's an oligarchy, it's a cartel membership in which OPEC controls the oil prices, so the free market principle doesn't apply here anyway. So don't think about rebutting on that question. All right, I have mainly three questions to ask you as the web speaker. Number one, does the free market work? Number two, who protects the environment? Mind you, they drop this completely. Number three, how prepared are we for the future? And then I'm going to go into a little modest policy comparison. Number one, does the free market work? The answer is no. Government intervention can work when it's allocated to the right resources. They brought us the example of Sweden. Actually, the same thing happened in Finland, and although it may externally look like I'm augmenting their case, I'm not. Because the government tried to artificially control both supply and demand of the Swedish oil industry, coal industry, and pine wood industry, the timber wood industry. Their industry completely fell, and the supply and demand chain was not properly expressed or represented. That is a problem with the government intervention. But the government intervention we're trying to do here is very, very passive and very modest. What we're only going to do here is take taxes from companies that have already caused harm to our society, both environmentally and to our energy industry by monopolizing it, and use it to transition into a better society in which these companies also reap their benefits as they're not reaping enough or they're not prepared enough for here. And we're making sure that the citizens do not go under some kind of so-called free market, Adam Smith capitalist oil shock once again. In fact, even if we do have to make an oil shock, what proposition is saying that even if, I repeat, even if that oil shock does happen, which we highly doubt, it's going to be a lot better than that big oil shock we're going to have when we're not prepared during that 30 years after oil has been depleted. And they still haven't brought a response to that. I'm going to explain why free market principle does not work here. As I explained to you, and as our second speaker perfectly told you, energy industry is one of two things: monopoly and oligopoly. And to make this to make this a little clear, oligopoly is the control of the entire industry by a few individuals or a few companies. And in this case, what's the best example? OPEC, Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. Now, although this is a foreign example, this is important because they're practically the sole providers, or if not the main providers of oil to most of the countries around the world. Statistics say around 89 to 95% of countries are mostly provided by OPEC. And since they are an oligarchy, no matter how free market you want to be, unless you're the United States of America that already has a big oil supply, it's going to affect your economy drastically. Now, I already proved to you that there are external forces outside the free market, which is, by theory, great. Adam Smith was kind of right. But there are forces outside the free market that harm it. And when these forces do exist, it's the government's duty to make sure that they do not come in by negative externalities. And that is what our policy is trying to cover today. If the free market is so effective, please explain on the opposition what could be the explanation behind the Great Depression. The Great Depression was solved because of government intervention. That's what Keynesianomics is all about. The reason Keynesianomics worked is that there was a proper decision to a detrimental situation, and the government was just more than helpful. In this situation, of course, government intervention did work. Our second question, who protects the environment better? Although we've kept this argument quite steady, they've dropped it almost entirely. But the debate boils down to two things. Is it a citizen that should enforce it, or is it the government? First of all, Yosemite, symbol of natural protection and environmentalism, has been constructed because the government enforced it to be. It's not that the citizens voted in America in the 19th century that they would like Yosemite National Park to become a park area, national park area. It's the government's intervention that created such environmentalist costs. Now, if they were correct, we've been doing this environmentalist movement for ever since J.B. Rockefeller got into the industry and the Industrial Revolution started getting into a pickup. Now, Greenpeace and Sea Shepherd, they raid ships, do illegal stuff around the world to purpose their environmentalist actions, and how much change we have in the whaling industry. Greenpeace also does environmentalism, go green. How green have we gotten ever since 2009 when they first proposed it? In fact, as we said, the subway system has proved more greener than Greenpeace. And the citizens have done a worse job of proposing this to the government. Although their intentions should be acknowledged as very, very gratuitous, the government is the sole actor that can provide these expenses to prove that ensure that these policies are taken into action. Now, the third question, how prepared are we? Before I do that, yes.
You're using examples that are not related to today's motion. We cannot tax OPEC as long as...
No. I'm not talking about taxing OPEC. I'm taxing about the secondary receivers of the oil from OPEC, which is GS and SK. If we do protect the free market, we'll be taxing these guys anyway. And that's why OPEC is an important player in this debate. On to the third question. I can explain to you in 2 words, very simple words, about how unprepared we are and why we're unprepared. No money. Okay? We have no capital in the industry. And they've already proven to you quite contradictorily that we have 30 years down the road and we're still in R&D development. By this stage, according to the International Energy Agency, which they like so much, according to them, we're vastly underprepared. I'm quoting the head here. We're vastly underprepared for the imminent energy crisis because we do not have renewable resources to fill up the gap of potentially expiring fossil fuels. That should be some sort of tingle to you. Why? Because I'm going to give you a rather friendly example. Hyundai produces over 20 types of renewable energy cars. How many can you name? Other than like Genesis Hybrid? None. The energy industry, without government help, the renewable energy industry at least, has been a complete failure because the government has not had direct intervention. Probably the only renewable energy or energy efficient car you can name is the Toyota Prius. And what happened with that? The government of the United States of America and Japan both said that the Prius should have lower prices so as to induce people to buy the Prius and use more renewable energy. And that's a possible explanation to why the Prius is possibly the only known car that produces good fuel efficiency while using renewable energy at the same time. I'm also asking you, it's great if companies are cooperative. And they said that companies will on their own accord develop renewable energy. That's great. It will only speed up the process. But the thing is, if they do it on their own without government intervention or government support in this case, they're not going to do it in time. As they said, I keep on saying this, I'm sorry, but we have 30 years down the road and we're still in R&D. At this time, we should get ready to integrate this into our civilian population. But how many hybrids do you see today? I mean, transportation industry, like Hanjin and heavy industries that transport things around the world, 0%. A big donut is what represents the number of renewable energy ships that operate around the entire globe. Every single one is run on fossil fuels, and mind you, these are the largest spenders of fossil fuels in the entire district. Now, as a last resort, I'm going to tell you and juxtapose the two policies. Number one, our policy was that the free market is a good principle, but when push comes to shove, practicality should be taken into consideration. And in this case, the free market really does not work. Also, we said that the transition should be gradual. I don't know how many times we redundantly said this, gradual. They said that the $50 price tag will be put automatically on each oil barrel as soon as this so-called energy shock comes about. But as they have sort of conceded partially, we're saying that this process should occur very gradually. And as all historical examples have proven so far, even in the 90s OPEC crisis, oil shock crisis, whatever gradual improvement has been taken has been a good one. And it has never produced as many negative externalities as have been the instantaneous ones, or by second thought, the things that have been promoted by the free market. Their policy was kind of like, we should promote the free market without taking into consideration the circumstances. And that the transition will occur naturally. It will occur naturally. We do concede that. But it will not occur without cost if the government does not intervene here. We already told you that no, it will not work because the transition is too slow. And we already gave you too many reasons in our third question as to why this transition will be slow. Ladies and gentlemen, could I have my time, please? I don't have a stopwatch. All right, to sum up, ladies and gentlemen, government side has shown you so far that we should have an energy efficient policy that provides both the future plan and the most imminent plan. We need to take care of the energy crisis and make sure that nobody is harmed from it, both the corporations and the individual investors, whereas they've entrusted the free market, and we already disproved you. We debunked the myth of the free market and told you why individual investors will not have as big a part as they will in any other situation. Because here, ladies and gentlemen, the government should be the actor in both environment, in both capitalism, and in preparing ourselves for the future, in which renewable energy will definitely be the main actor and supplier of our daily expenses. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Madison, for this debate is very straightforward. We all want to transit and shift from a fossil fuel energy-based economy to a more clean energy technology-based economy. But the problem is how? Because we both know that we have to do that within 30 years. And we both know we've been trying so by both ways, by government subsidies and also by private markets. That has been happening so far. So now it's time to analyze what has happened and what is our goal and what is the right way to achieve it based on the analysis of what has happened so far. So that's really the debate. Basically, whether or not taxation of these companies and the subsidies and the swing subsidies for the energy, clean energy-based companies has resulted in success, and whether or not the other alternative we've told you about having a private market economy based on capitalistic investment by the energy companies themselves will be more effective. In fact, we have proved to you that in their case, their model has failed from the previous years. We told you how from the analysis of past years, our policy has been proven successful. That's the way to go. No, thank you. So that's one of two major clashes. First, basically, whether or not taxation of these fossil-based, fuel-based companies will be beneficial to meet our goal, sustainable development. And second, about whether or not their second part of policy, subsidies, government subsidies for energy, clean energy companies will also contribute to sustainable development. So let's talk about the first part, about whether or not taxing these fossil fuel companies will be actually beneficial to meeting our common agreed consensus that we need to transit and shift gradually and with sustainable economy to an environmental-friendly economy. So first of all, the nation starts by talking about fossil fuel energy is already being subsidized despite their external cost and harm. And so it is actually fair for them to take the responsibility and be taxed. Well, first of all, again, it's not about whether it's fair or not. It's about necessity. And in fact, there are very facts that we are, despite their externalities and harms on the environment, still giving billions of trillions of dollars actually around the world for these companies, prove the very necessity we have for fossil fuels. We really hate fossil fuels, and frankly, I would want to stop using fossil fuel for the sake of the environment that I love so much. But the status quo, as you can see from the subsidies of trillions of dollars, the environment and the economy as a whole around the world all need this fossil fuel. And that is why, despite the external cost, we are still unfairly subsidizing these fossil fuels because we need them. And that is why we say that fundamentally, in order to have sustainable development, not only for the environment, but also for the economy as well, we still need to consider what might happen before we have clean energy. Because in those times, we still need fossil fuel. And that is why we shouldn't be accelerating the death of that industry. So thank you, sirs. Now, in response to this, we talk about how we will still maintain a sustainable development by increasing the price of fossil fuel and thereby decreasing consumption. Well, we have two major rebuttals to this. Well, first of all, what the policy is basically saying is that they're going to create an artificial oil shock, and so that people will stop using oil, just like it happened in the 1980s or in the 2000s, in the 21st century oil shock. But you see, no thank you, sir. The major problem is that is still not sustainable. It is very contradictory from them to say that they want a sustainable and gradual change, but in the end, solve this problem by a mechanism through which we change consumer behavior by a shock, a very powerful shock, enough to change people's behavior despite the necessity of oil. So thank you, sir, again. So in the end, what they needed to prove was that there will be a viable solution right now, so that even though we increase the price of oil, we will have a viable solution and not a stagflation. But in fact, we heard from the very last speaker that right now the only car that can use these renewable energy is Toyota Prius. Yes, I agree, we have never heard about it. Why? Because they're not effective. We told you from the very first speaker that we still have no viable solution, that it is still the R&D technology stage, and that is why we have to admit, ladies and gentlemen, that yes, we have failed. We will not get it yet to ban and just go away from fossil fuel. Yes, sir.
Doesn't that demonstrate the necessity in order to subsidize it because we have no money to invest in renewable energy right now?
There is another solution that came from the government side, which I will address. In fact, the subsidies will not be actually benefiting this investment, but rather harming them. In fact, let me address that point right now. In fact, we have seen that subsidies at the cost of the economy doesn't work. Why? Because stagflation by nature is a recession, just that it is a worse one than other global recessions. And what does that mean? That means the government spending is decreased more and more, and that's why we see there have been bankruptcies of Solyndra and companies that have received $500 million from the government. And we see also that in terms of countries like Greece and Spain and Italy that have stopped their subsidies for these companies, not only because there's no breakthroughs through subsidies from government, but also by the fact that their very mechanism by which this policy works undermines the very sustainability of this policy, basically by draining out the economy and also government funding due to stagflation, which basically means recession. So thank you, sir. That is why we say, in the end, if you really want sustainable change and gradual change, no thank you, sir. What you really need is not taxation and killing of that industry that is still vital to your industry and economy. Now, of course, your only rebuttal to this is that actually it may not be that bad because you're having a gradual change. Well, we have two major points. First of all, then there's a case shift because the very mechanism by which they have a shock and therefore change consumer behavior is that it is a shock, a severe shock enough to change people's behavior in the first place. So if it is very gradual and easy, in those terms, there will no change in consumer behavior in the first place because you need that also do so much. In fact, thank you, sir. In order for their policy to take place and change consumer behavior, their mechanism must work only under the circumstance that in the end they will have a stagflation and an artificial oil shock, because that's the mechanism that they themselves describe as why this policy will change consumer behavior. So now let's go to the second major class, so bigger class, well, subsidies of government. Now, we both agree in the end, they conceded finally that fine, let's say that the private market can work, it has to save it. But maybe a boost by government subsidy will actually help them much. But that itself is contradictory, thank you, sir. Because what we say is government subsidy, whenever they try to allocate the resources by themselves and not really the private market energy companies themselves to decide and venture on, what happens is that first of all, governments themselves are very risky, cannot take risky ventures that may be going for breakthroughs because they're spending taxpayers' money. So unlike Axis and GS thank you, sir. What happens is that they cannot actually use $500 million just for one risky move that might actually bring breakthroughs. And that is why, ladies and gentlemen, the government should not take money and resources from these energy companies and just decide on their own what is the best and efficient way to increase breakthroughs and increase renewable energy. But second, I also told you how the very idea of having subsidies for these markets basically means and implies that they will have some money and tax through some taxation. In other words, in order for government to increase spending by subsidies, that means they have to take money away from the investment market, from the energy companies in particular, in this time under their model. But the fact of the matter is, we've told you how private market, without government intervention, and without the government taxing them, taking money away from them, is actually more beneficial and has actually proven more successful. We've compared the example of government subsidy-driven markets and private markets. We've given examples about how Solyndra, a company that has received $500 million from the United States, has really gone bankrupt. Not only unsuccessful in producing a breakthrough, but bankrupt, ladies and gentlemen. But on the contrary, we told you about how Californian government has allowed the free market and private market to flourish, and how their market is flourishing and having a profit in R&D. Now, for their own rebuttal against this is about how, well, it's not a free market because you see we have oligarchy or monopolies, and their example was about how their public utilities and how there are cartels regarding petroleum producers. Well, they're not the investors that we mentioned anyways, right? We're talking about not those people, but the energy producers themselves, who actually have more incentives than any other company or any other government. Since within 20 years, if they don't have any breakthrough within their own technology, they're going to die out. And that is why, ladies and gentlemen, in the end, these companies are the ones that can choose the best. And even though they say we can just take money and give them back to them, still, it's the government, under their model, it's the government choosing which company to receive more subsidies. And that is why that itself, allocation is based on government precision standards. That's why it's so hard. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, don't be fooled by the fancy language on the government side. Their argument comes down to 3 words. It is urgent. And that's the only side that the government side is saying today. The third speaker literally made a 7-minute speech explaining why it's urgent and it needs to happen now, ladies and gentlemen. Just because you have an urgency doesn't mean you have to do right now, ladies and gentlemen. Just because you're hungry doesn't justify you eating garbage, ladies and gentlemen. That's exactly what we think of the government side's model today, ladies and gentlemen. Now, we've proven you through our rebuttals, especially about why this policy does not work, why this policy harms the economy, why this policy harms the environment. We've had little to no response from the government side because they're so hacked on the urgency, ladies and gentlemen. But before we move on to my actual critical moments, let's first lay out what both sides understand. Firstly, we understand that the environment is in peril. Also, we understand that investment is needed. The conflict here is how do we get this, ladies and gentlemen? And we proved to you exactly how it does not happen on the government side model. But again, they were so hacked on the urgency that they did not substantiate on their own points. So let's review their attacks on our point that the free market has failed, ladies and gentlemen. But the fundamental contradiction on the government side is apparent, ladies and gentlemen. The second speaker came up to the podium and gave an example in which 12% increase happened under private market, ladies and gentlemen. But he said that subsidies would actually help this market, saying that private market has worked on up to a certain point. Then the third speaker came up with an emotional speech by saying that free market has failed, that he actually stated that because the Great Depression happened because of failed market, that the free market has failed, ladies and gentlemen. With the same logic, I could say that smartphones happen on the free market and then the free market is good, ladies and gentlemen. You can't make rational and hasty generalization upon that matter. Just because the Great Depression happened because of the free market doesn't justify that every single action under the free market is wrong. They're factually wrong on that matter, ladies and gentlemen. As such, we prove to you factually instead that there are 2 reasons why the free market will work. Firstly, we prove that it's a dying industry, that companies to survive need to do this. Secondly, it's a blue ocean assets. They are encouraged to do this among themselves. Wouldn't you as CEOs want to invest in a market that is promising and will profit you money, ladies and gentlemen? And they have no response from the government side. Moving on to their own case, does their model work? Does investing in their clean energy market work? Well, firstly, can it happen, ladies and gentlemen? This controversy about price. Now, I gave you the destructive example of saying you need $50 at least increase, ladies and gentlemen. What's their response? Well, I guess it's okay, it's kind of slow, ladies and gentlemen. There's 2 fundamental problems because you can really go either side. Firstly, you have a too small policy or a too slow policy because in economic terms, being too slow is equivalent between too little, ladies and gentlemen. It has little to no effect on the market. Or secondly, you have too strong or too fast, which detrimentally harms the economy. The oil shock, ladies and gentlemen. And they actually conceded to the point that an oil shock might happen, ladies and gentlemen. The oil shock damaged the economy for over a decade, ladies and gentlemen. We do not want to have a model which the economy is detrimentally harmed, especially when you have the free market, which is currently working as the opposition side proves today, ladies and gentlemen. So let's move on to my, and does it work, ladies and gentlemen? Again, the only substantiation after the first speaker was saying that, the breakthrough point is so close, that it's only 30 years now. The private sector is not working, ladies and gentlemen. Well, 2 fundamental problems, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, the government side never proved that without governmental subsidies, this will fail. The second speaker actually said we already have a 12% increase. But let's continue that it actually works. We give you the logic why it does work because of dying industry in the blue ocean. While the government side said, well, it's urgent, and government money is needed now. And as the government third speaker said, it's a donut zero, ladies and gentlemen. Regardless it's a donut zero or a donut 100, ladies and gentlemen, we have to understand the right policies on the opposition side. And the government side never substantiated on their own policy, ladies and gentlemen. As such, we understand the subsidies have failed when it comes to the economic, the environmental perspective, and we consider the free market beside on the opposition side. For these reasons, we are proud to oppose this.
Now the last speaker from the government side, proposition reply speaker, please come to the podium, please.
and judges, if you're adults and during your public education, you have learned anything about renewable energy and that it's coming up, and if you see the current situation, you will know that something's wrong that's going on, because no change is happening in today's society. And what the government is saying here is that if the opposition side is to call this failed, that's only when our society has been doing ever anything, ladies and gentlemen. We say that the reason why the technologies that we have learned that will come out soon is still in research and development. It's not because the government is doing it wrongly. It's because not enough money is there, ladies and gentlemen. Currently, as I've said from my introduction, more than 70% of the money that is invested to the energy industry is going into fossil fuel, not renewable energy. So if the government is trying something, then we could have actually admitted to the opposition that it's failing. But then are we ever investing enough money to it, ladies and gentlemen? The reason why we're seeing so many failures in this industry, and the reason why we're still actually experiencing a continuous increase in the consumption of fossil fuel is because we are not taking this policy, ladies and gentlemen. It's because we are not taking enough measures decrease the size of the fossil fuel industry while actually increasing and subsidizing the clean energy industry, ladies and gentlemen. See, the fundamental problem here of the opposition side was that they did not have a case. See, what they were doing throughout the debate was that they did not have a value that they were going to stand. All they were doing is that they were criticizing small points of our policy, ladies and gentlemen, while we were trying to give you a direct value, a principle in which we can stand, about the environmental responsibility of the government, about the government's responsibility to preserve the actual society and to be prepared for further changes. Now, those values were never touched in this debate, ladies and gentlemen. Now, they basically said that the only thing that they actually criticized about the actual mechanism was that the government is not the right actor here because they don't know anything about the industry. Now, first of all, any support for this was not given, ladies and gentlemen. Simple assumption. And we say that it's an assumption because in the government, there are actually experts within the industry who can make decisions. We make that clear. And second of all, they criticize that there will be an environment where the companies will become competing for the governmental subsidies, and that's a bad environment. Why is that ever a bad environment, ladies and gentlemen? When we're actually making these people to go for competition, are we actually looking for development? Are we actually making these companies develop more and further, ladies and gentlemen? Now, they also talk about how the government should not be using the tax money to venture. See, two things. We have established that it's the government who can ever take the venture, ladies and gentlemen. Who else is ever going to do this? What kind of private industry is ever going to indulge in this issue and try to solve the problem when it's a venture? And not to mention that our third speaker perfectly said about this, it's not the taxpayers' money, it's the tax of the company. It's not our money, ladies and gentlemen. We made that clear throughout the thing. So what the proposition side was doing here was that we were giving an actual model that can actually prepare for the society. We were talking about how the energy threat is imminent and how we have to increase the price in order to change consumer behavior. About this point, there was a big conflict. All they were saying was that we're going to have a $50 increase in price, and that's a serious thing. Ladies and gentlemen, gradual. Ladies and gentlemen, they talk about free market. What we're seeing throughout the debate was that their free market, their so-called free market that they're so concerned about, adapts to gradual changes, ladies and gentlemen. It's not as if one day you wake up and the actual cost is much more increased by $50, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to have a dollar-to-dollar increase, and our society is going to adapt to that, ladies and gentlemen. We see that there were cases, yes, of governmental intervention that failed, but that's only because the government tried to manipulate the supply and demand here. But our policy is not talking about that. Remember, what was our policy, ladies and gentlemen? It's the government taking the money, simply taking the tax from the industries and transferring that money. We're not ever involved in the artificial supply and demand control here. That is exactly the reason why all the arguments do not stand, because we have properly pointed those arguments out, ladies and gentlemen. Now today, our case basically stands till the end, because while the opposition's rebuttals, not the case, towards our stance and towards our policy were all publicly rebutted, our values about the governmental responsibilities were never touched, not to mention about the company benefits. They did not say anything about how these companies would prepare in the future, ladies and gentlemen. The only thing they were concerned was about their own selfish needs, about if their price is going to increase or not. But we say that yes, it is going to increase, but not by $50, maybe % every day, and that is going to result in a better environment in the future. And if you think that this is true, please vote for the proposition side. Thank you.
HUFS YTN-HUFS Youth English Debating Championship is congratulations to first tournament.
역사를 썼다.
대박. I love you guys.
여러분 모두 수고하셨습니다. 진짜. 예선 방송이 예선보다 결승 토너먼트까지 승패와 관계없이 8분대회를 펼친 선수들에게 천사와 경례를 보내드립니다.
Thank you everyone. Congratulations for your efforts in
다음 시간도 계속 부탁드리겠습니다. 이제 2013 YTN-HUFS 제5회 고등학생 영어토론대회 챔피언팀을 발표하도록 하겠습니다. 2013 YTN-HUFS 제5회 고등학생 영어토론대회 명예의 챔피언
The 5th YTN-HUFS Youth Debating Championship, the Grand Champion,
청신국제고 First Tournament 팀 무대 위로 올라주시기 바랍니다. 챔피언 시간은 계속해서 YTN 국제상무님께서 해주시겠습니다.
The awarding will be done by Executive Managing Director Kim Beck of YTN.
축하합니다. 명예 챔피언에게는 상장과 트로피, 상금 100만 원, 해외 연수의 특전이 주어지게 되겠습니다.
Congratulations, the champions will be awarded with certificates, trophies, and a prize money of 1 million won. 2013 YTN-HUFS Youth English Debating Championship, the Grand Champion. Team First Tournament. This certificate officially recognizes that the following individuals are the Grand Champion in the 5th YTN-HUFS Youth English Debating Championship.
축하드립니다. 여러분 다시 한번 축하의 박수를 부탁드립니다.
Congratulations. Please give the Grand Champion a big round of applause again.
됐어요? 네, 됐어요. 오케이. 하나, 둘, 갈게요. 네, 감사합니다.